Once upon a time, there was a conservator who came across two old books. The books had broken spines, and the conservator thought that was a real shame. Determined to save them, she set to work. But these were not just any books. They were almost 100 years old, and held within them the timeless fairy tales and stories of the great Danish author Hans Christian Andersen. The books had gathered a thin layer of dust from years of slumber, and so the conservator decided that the journey to restoration must begin with a dry cleaning. With a soft brush she gently brushed the dust from between the pages. Where stubborn dirt clung to the pages she used a delicate scalpel, lifting away the grime with the utmost care. The books must have been pleased with this first step, she thought, for she knew that if dust was left unchecked before any moisture touched the pages, it would become far more difficult to remove later. The covers have gathered dirt as well, she mused. I must call upon my trusted smoke sponge. This enchanted tool could draw out embedded dirt from the very fibers of the material without causing harm. As the conservator turned the pages, her heart ached at the sight of their wounds, tears and loose leaves threatening to separate forever. These must be mended before it's too late, she declared. Fortunately, she had the finest Japanese koso paper and a fresh batch of wheat starch paste at the ready. The conservator carefully took one book, found the first tear, and immediately set to work. She tore a delicate patch from the koso paper, brushed it with paste, and laid it gently over the tear. A piece of non-worn polyester and a layer of filler paper were placed on either side, and then a small weight bag was laid atop it to dry. She repeated the process on the other side, ensuring the tear was strengthened from both sides. Diligently she examined every page, for she knew that even the smallest missed tear could lead to great damage in the future. The conservator always made her patches slightly larger than the tear itself, so they extended beyond the edges of the paper. This ensures the repairs hold strong, she thought. This meant she had to trim the patches afterward, but as she always said, it's a small price to pay for doing the job properly. When the patches had dried, the conservator took up her sharp scalpel and a small piece of cardboard to trim them, taking great care not to harm the pages beneath. With each precise cut, she felt the satisfaction of bringing stability back to the book. So far, so good, the conservator thought. The text blocks are now safe. But when she turned her attention to the bindings, she saw they were still suffering, and so she hurried on, eager to heal them. The bindings had hollow backs, which pleased the conservator, because that was good for the book's structures. But Alice, the old hollow backs were made of acetic cardboard, and she knew they would only bring further harm in time. With careful hands she peeled away what she could, and where stubborn remnants clung to the binding, she used a blunt scalpel to gently scrape them away. Now, the conservator had reached a most critical point in her task. It was time to restore the bindings. She began by lifting the original binding material from the covers, so that she could tuck new reinforcing materials underneath, as she wanted the structure of the books to benefit from the strength of the reinforcement without obscuring the original binding material. She cut pieces of cotton cloth to use as reinforcement and prepared new acid-free hollow backs. With a brush, the conservator spread wheat starch paste onto the cloth and carefully positioned the new hollow back at its center. Then, with the precision of a skilled artisan, she placed them onto the books. She worked quickly but precisely, adhering the cloth to the book's covers, ensuring the new linings adhered securely while remaining hidden beneath the original materials. Once she was satisfied with the alignment, she also tucked the cloth into the head and tail of the spine, wrapping it around the hollow back and the covers. Using her bone folder, she smoothed the original covering back into place, securing it with more paste and gentle pressure. But she did not fasten the outer edges of the spine just yet. She knew the waiting for the underlayers to dry would make the final step easier. When the reinforcements had set, she returned to affix the last edges of the covering. One book required only gentle pressure from weight bags as it dried, but the other posed a greater challenge. This will need support from multiple angles at once, she realized. And so she had a clever idea. I would better find a bandage for this book. It has been injured after all, she thought. She bound the book carefully, tucking small weight bags under the wrapping to secure the pressure. The conservator could see the end of her journey approaching, but her mission was not yet complete. The corners of the boards were weak and separating, the very layers of paper pulling apart from age. To mend them, she first spread the layers further apart. It seemed odd, she thought, to worsen the damage in order to fix it, but she knew it was necessary. With a special diluted wheat starch paste, she carefully placed the adhesive between the layers with a knife, working from the center outward. She placed small non-worn polyester barriers between the corners and the binding material and added blotter paper on both sides before pressing the layers together. To ensure a strong hold, she placed small cardboards on either side of the corners and secured them with a clamp, knowing this would keep everything perfectly aligned as it dried. The conservator also noticed areas where the paper and the covers had begun to peel away. With delicate precision, she secured each loose section with a small dab of paste, pressing them gently into place. She worked with the patience of one who understands that every small detail contributes to the whole. Though the conservator had completed her work on the text blocks, there was one last thing she had saved for the end: the folds of the end papers. She prepared long strips of Japanese paper and applied them carefully with wheat starch paste. Then she placed non-worn polyester and blotter paper over them and weighted them down to dry, just as she had done with the torn pages. She always saved this step for last, knowing that if she later realized she needed to make further work that required access to the inside of the spine, she would have to undo her own work, and she thought that would be a shame. Just like with the page repairs, she made the strips slightly oversized, so she had to trim them afterward. But since there was no space for the cardboard inside the joint, she instead let her scalpel glide carefully along the paper's edge. She always found this process satisfying. She loved the feeling of the scalpel cutting cleanly through the Japanese paper. At last, as the final repairs dried, the conservator looked upon the books with satisfaction. But something still seemed incomplete. Every part of the book had been stabilized, but the bright white cloth she had used for the reinforcements stood out starkly against the aged bindings. This will not do, she thought, quickly grabbing her watercolor paints. She mixed her paints with care, testing the shades until they matched the tones of the old materials. She painted the first delicate layer, ensuring that the color only covered the fill and not the original material, and then she waited patiently for it to dry before applying another, for she knew that colors shift as they dry. Layer by layer, she worked until the new repairs blended seamlessly with the original bindings. Now, at last, her work was done. The conservator leaned back, surveying her efforts with deep satisfaction. It had been a long journey, but she had cherished every step. Conservation, she knew, often came with moments of tension and uncertainty, but in the end, the books would be stronger, and she felt joy in giving them new life, making them able to live happily ever after. And that is how the conservator restored two 100-year-old fairy tale books. Now that was a real story.